I'm a person who likes to know exactly where I'm going. If I'm driving and I don't know exactly how to get to my destination, I frequently will put the destination in my phone and get turn-by-turn directions, even if it's not a big deal. Now, there's a stereotype that men hate stopping to ask for direction. I do not fit that stereotype whatsoever. I see no benefit in wasting extra time to prove a point that I might be able to find a location when I can go to my phone or ask somebody how to get there. So I pull it up on my phone and it says I've got to turn left here, or I've got to turn right there, and it says the destination will be on your left or your right, wherever it is. And it's fantastic. And I fear there are times we live our Christian life like that. We want to follow Jesus like that. Jesus, I will follow you, but I need the turn-by-turn directions to know how to get to the destination. And one of the great things about my phone is that it will tell me if there's heavy traffic ahead. It will tell me if there's road construction ahead. So it's also going to tell me the obstacles that I might encounter on my journey. And there are times where I am driving and the phone will alert me saying, hey, there's a quicker way now to get to your destination, whether there was an accident or traffic patterns or something like that. And it gives me the option. I can either select the new way or continue on the current way that I was going. See, we want God not only to give us the turn-by-turn directions, but we want Him to tell us what obstacles we might encounter, what things might not be as smooth as we would like them to be. But the fact of the matter is, God's plan is not always smooth. Now, here's the thing. It's not because of God. The obstacles that we encounter when we follow God are not because God just messed up. It's not because God couldn't figure it out or made some type of mistake. See, the path isn't really smooth because God invites us. See, God's plan of salvation is interwoven through humanity's sinful propensity. It's interwoven through us. We are sinful people, and even if by accident we sometimes distort God's plans, we mess up, we take a wrong turn. But what God does, He said, I'm going to recalculate and get you back there. You may have taken a boneheaded turn, but I'm going to figure it out for you if you just continue to seek me and follow you. So it's not one of those things we have to be discouraged, but we also have to recognize that it's not always going to be smooth. And there are times, if we're honest, where it's other people who cause us obstacles. You know, we live in a sinful world, and we're navigating a sinful world while trying to follow a God that is holy and righteous and perfect. It doesn't always work well, not because of God, but because of humanity and our sinful propensity. And this is where we find the story of Ruth. We'll conclude our series on Ruth today, end of chapter 4, starting in verse 13. But what's happened is we have Ruth, who is a non-Israelite, she's outside of the family of God. She's from Moab. And we have Naomi. Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law. Naomi's husband and all of her sons have died. So Naomi and Ruth are widows, and they come back to Israel, come back to the promised land where God had told His people to live. And they were widows. And in the ancient world, women depended on men. Let's just be honest with that. They didn't have a good future, a good outlook on life or a good prospect in life because they were widows and didn't have much going for them. But this guy named Boaz comes up, and he's very generous to Ruth. And in fact, he becomes what they call her kinsman redeemer. He marries her, takes her into his household, and Naomi and Ruth are taken care of now. Now, that's not where the story ends, because in Ruth chapter 4, verse 13, we find that Boaz has married Ruth. She becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law who loves you and who has been better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the baby and cuddled him, and she cared for him as if he were his own, or if he were her own. So Ruth and Naomi have a future now, a future that's not destitute, a future that's not depressing. Their future is secure. Now, the book of Ruth is a fairly short book, 4 chapters is all it is in the Old Testament there. And the book is not about the faithfulness of people. It's about God's faithfulness and how he works through people who join him in his plan. Because the redemption, the salvation, the blessings that Naomi and Ruth received were not because of merit. It wasn't because they earned something or did something that said, hey, this is what they should receive. It was because of grace. Ruth and Naomi did not deserve the generosity that Boaz presented. They did not deserve him coming and helping them out as much as he did. And particularly Naomi. Naomi didn't really have much merit. For most of the book, Naomi's not really portrayed in a real positive light. She's kind of a depressing character, if we're honest with ourselves. Because her and her family, her husband Elimelech, they were living in the promised land, and there was a famine, and they said, you know what, we're going to go somewhere else. So they left the promised land, the land that God promised his people to take care of them. They said, we're going to go to greener pastures. We're going to go somewhere else. And they found that the greener pasture wasn't really greener after all. But everything after that, when she came back to the promised land, God began working in her life. But when she came back at the end of Ruth chapter 1, she says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Naomi means sweet. It means kind. It means pleasant. That's a good thing. That's a good name that you would like to have. She said, instead, call me Mara, which means bitter and heartache. Now, when we're honest, we recognize she lost her husband and her son. She had no family left. I mean, it was a difficult time for her, so make sure we give her a break. But she had sunk to a deep spot of despair. But now, at the end of the book, at the end of the story, things are moving in a positive direction. They rejoice because the son that Ruth had provides hope to Naomi. And the son is now the one who's responsible for the redemption of the whole family. All of this family is now reliant on this child. So Naomi receives new life in her old age. We don't know how old she was, but she was older. And she received new life. She was rejuvenated and has new hope. This despair that had consumed her for so long was finally gone. And her future has a much different trajectory than it did before. But as we read the whole story of Ruth, Naomi is often an obstacle for God's plan. She tries to scheme, she tries to plan, she tries to do things on her own, and God has to find a workaround to be able to figure it out so his plan can still work. She makes some questionable decisions. But this is part of God's plan because God's salvation plan is interwoven through humanity's sinful propensity. These are the type of people. Naomi is the type of person that God works through. He works through people like you and me who are sinful. And he does it intentionally. So even though we might not be clear on what we should do, even though we don't have it all figured out, God says, that's okay. I'm going to work with you. And that's what he said to Naomi. And her bitterness and her despair was removed. Because God was able to work out his plan of redemption. I promise you, you can't screw up God's plan. And I want to make sure we're clear on that. You're not that important. Right? I mean, if I can mess up God's plan to the point where he can't fix it, then I question God's power. But God is so much more powerful than my mistakes that I can follow him with confidence, not fear. Now, we do have to recognize there are times where we have collateral damage. Elimelech died. His 2 sons, Kilion, Mahlon, died. Those were realities of the story of people who were unfaithful to God. But God's plan of redemption can still come, can still happen. God's salvation plan is interwoven through humanity's sinful propensity. So what we have here is we are living in the already but not yet. It's a fun Christian terminology here. And so we believe in Jesus Christ. We believe that he died, he rose again from the grave, and he has provided a way for us to be forgiven. And so he has won the victory. He has defeated Satan. And so we say he has won, but it's yet not already come to fruition. We're waiting for him to come back and return, and that's when all the fullness of who Jesus Christ will be established in this world. That's when we talk about no more sickness, no more pain, and we long for those times, and we long for Jesus to come back and establish that reign, but we're not there yet. We can begin to get a glimpse of it and begin to experience his kingdom. And while Naomi is a long time before Jesus, she's kind of experiencing that type of hope. She has this child that she can now care for. Now, this story happened centuries before the exile. The exile was when the Israelites, the people of God, were destroyed and overrun from the promised land and removed. So they're exiled from it. But many believe this story was actually written around the 5th century BC, which is a long time after the exile, as a way of letting those who are in exile know that God is still working in the background, that God is still doing something. Even though we think plans haven't gone like they should, God can still bring them back to where he wants them to be. And so we can think about our world today, regardless of how crazy the world is or isn't, we can always look at the world and find something wrong with it. We can always look at the world and say, oh man, they need Jesus, they need saving, they need redemption, they need something. So there are times where those who try to follow Jesus can feel like they are exiled, like you are gone, like you aren't relevant, like you are just out on your own, lonely in despair. But God can bring us back. He's working in the background. He's working through you and he's working through me. This story in Ruth is about God's faithfulness first. And we see how his salvation plan is interwoven through sinful people like you and me. We have a few more verses that I fear we often skip over. See, the women of the town told Naomi again, they said, now at last you have a son again. And they named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. This is the genealogical record of their ancestor Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. Praise be the Lord. Amen. This is a very important passage. Now, the Bible can proceed without this. It's not like this is one of those things that's super important to the narrative, like there's a big plot hole in the story. But this points to something that is so powerful for us today. But let's work through it for a minute. So we talk about Perez, the genealogical record of their ancestor Perez. Now, Perez was the son of Judah. And so earlier in the service we sang this song, The Lion and the Lamb. It says, our God is the Lion of Judah. Judah is the ancestor here, is the father of Perez. Judah is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. It was the most powerful tribe. It was the tribe that stayed faithful to God. It's the tribe that all of this family comes from. And so we see that God is working through this tribe. Now, this tribe wasn't perfect. See, Judah, son Perez, his mother was Tamar. Tamar was first the wife of Judah's son Er. He died, and so the custom was that then the next brother was supposed to marry the widow, and so the next son, Onan, married Tamar, and he died and still didn't have any kids, and so the next son was supposed to marry her, and Judah's like, no, she's cursed, I don't want this to happen, so he didn't let his family fulfill the responsibility. And through some uncouth events, Judah and Tamar had Perez. And we see how God was able to change this sinful act, this sinful behavior from Judah and do powerful things that we'll see here in a moment. Then we get to Obed. Now, not much is known about him. Really, not much is known about most of the people here that were listed in the genealogical record. In fact, if you Google or look up a lot of their names, Nahshon, Salmon, they're mentioned in 3 spots. They're mentioned here in Ruth, mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke in genealogical records. There's only 3 spots that they are mentioned. See, not much is known about them. But Obed's mom, you may remember, has an important role to play in the book of Joshua. When the Israelites are crossing over the Jordan River, they come to the city of Jericho that has big fortified walls, and she was the one who helped the Israelite spies figure out a plan of attack. But she also is known as a prostitute. So we see that there's another sinful person that is listed in this genealogical record. But then it gets to David. Ruth is the great-grandma of David. David was a king of Israel. Most consider him the best, most influential king of Israel. He was considered a man after God's own heart. And we know he wasn't real perfect. He made a few major blunders in his life that weren't real good. But we have all of these things, all of these sinful examples that we find in this genealogical record. But then we see Ruth and Boaz, who are 2 people, completely different backgrounds, who were faithful to God. And they set a new tone for their family, a new tone of pointing their family directly to God. Now, sometimes it's fun to look at the context of where a book is located in the Bible. So in some of the Jewish Bibles, Ruth is not located in the same place that it is in the Christian Bible. See, the Christian Bible, Ruth is located right before 1 Samuel. In the Jewish Bible, it's written more towards the Psalms and wisdom type literature, kind of a feel-good story, those types of things. But what's happening here is it's located right before 1 Samuel. Because in 1 Samuel is when Israel first and foremost gets a king. They were living without a king, but they begged God for one, and God finally gave them one. God said, it's a bad idea, but you want it, I'll give it to you. And so we had Saul, this guy from the tribe of Benjamin, rise up and be king. Saul didn't really do things as he should have. And instead, God raised up David to be king. And so what happens, there's a battle between the house of David and the house of Saul, the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah. And the book of Ruth gives validity to David's kingship. If we stop here, we're like, so what? If all we do is make it so it's more valid that David was king, if all we do is go through this story of Ruth and say, God's faithful, woo! We've missed probably the most powerful part of why this book is in the Old Testament. We missed part of the reason why this is so important for us today. Because the book of Ruth anticipates the kingship of David, which ultimately anticipates the coming of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ is a descendant of David. Go to Gospel of Matthew, go to the Gospel of Luke, and you eventually get to these same names, and Ram and Hezron and Amminadab and Solomon. You get to these names because Jesus is part of this lineage. So it's crazy to think that Jesus came through the family of Ruth. She was a foreigner. She had no business being where she should have been, or where she was. In fact, it was only because of sinful behaviors by other people that she was put in that place. And Jesus came through her. Now, Jesus didn't come because of Ruth. Even if Ruth said, no thanks, but no thanks, Jesus still would have come. But because of Ruth's choices is why Jesus came through her. So we can think of our own lives. Jesus is coming. Whether you like it or not, whether you want it to happen or not, Jesus is working in this world. He is bringing His plan of redemption to fruition. It's your choice of whether He comes through you or not. That's the choice we have. God's salvation plan is interwoven through humanity's, you and me, our sinful propensity. And we can join Him in this. The genealogical record of Jesus is not perfect. There are a lot of sinful examples that we find in those lists, the record of the names that are mentioned there. But when push comes to shove, we have to recognize no one is worthy to be part of the family of Jesus, right? Right? We believe that Jesus never sinned. We believe that Jesus is fully God. We believe all these things about him, and we are not worthy to be associated with him. But he says, I want you. He says, I don't care what the past is. I've got a future for you. He wants to change it. He wants something different for us. Ruth entered God's story because she committed to him. See, when she was in Moab and Naomi was saying, oh, my family has died, I'm going back to the promised land, going back to Israel. Ruth says, I want to go too. Says, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Where you die, I will die. And she says, may the Lord curse me if I allow anything but death to separate us. That's how committed Ruth was. She rejected the past life and came into the family of God. And because of that, Jesus Christ came through her. And God is initiating his plan of salvation, his plan of redemption. But again, we're waiting for the final consummation. And so we sang the song, even so, Lord, come, even so come, Lord Jesus. We sang that because we're waiting for him to come back. There's an old prayer or phrase in the church, Lord, come quickly. Several of you, I'm sure, remember that, have heard that before. What it's saying is, this world is sinful. This world is broken. And the only thing that can fix it is Jesus. And we aren't saying, Lord, come quickly because we're sick and tired of what we have to deal with. We say, Lord, come quickly because we're sick and tired of how broken people are trying to live. We want restoration and redemption. That's what Jesus brings. We're waiting on his return, and he is progressing to his final purpose. But this plan of redemption, this story that God invites us to participate in, it's messy, it's untidy, it's painful. Some of you have probably had painful experiences in the church before. Remember church splits or church fights or whatever that was. You know, even Christians are sinful. And sometimes we've got to deal with our own garbage. But God says, I don't like it, but I still want you. I still want to work through you. You are sinful people, but God says, I want you, and I want to bring my redemption through you. Now, I've never woven a tapestry before. I'm not sure, I don't know anybody who actually has. But I was doing some reading on it, and supposedly when you are weaving some type of tapestry, there are loose ends all over the place. There's loose ends everywhere you look. But as the tapestry comes into shape, more of those ends are connected and tied off and organized. And I feel that kind of is what God's plan of redemption is, because he's working with sinful people. We've got all these loose ends, these things that, oh, this doesn't look quite right, or this looks messed up, or this is unfinished. But God is working, and eventually we're going to have our eyes open and be able to step back and enjoy the beauty of God's plan if we choose to participate in it. If we choose to accept it, if we choose to go to him. See, Boaz, Ruth, Naomi, none of them fully understood what they were doing. None of them fully understood God's plan. And even after they passed, they still didn't recognize it. Because, Ruth was the great-grandma of David. She probably didn't even know David as king. So she didn't even get to see that benefit. But yet there was an even greater benefit in Jesus, an even greater blessing for them. The point is not for us to understand every part of God's plan. We don't need turn-by-turn directions. We don't need God to tell us where the obstacles are, the construction, or the things that aren't going to be as easy. We just need to be faithful to where God is calling us to go. God puts things in front of us, not so we can have difficult times, not so we have uncertainty, but because his plan uses sinful people. Throughout the book of Ruth, there's this concept, this Hebrew word called hesed. H-E-S-E-D is how you would say, write it. And it's blessing or kindness is the way we typically translate it into English. But it's more than that. It's more than just well wishes. It's more than just saying, oh, I hope things are going well or want good things for you. It's actively trying to help someone. If you are hurting and I say, bless you, and I go and I do something to actually help you get over the hurt and invest in you above and beyond what is required. And this hesed is part of God's nature. So we find that we cannot experience this blessing, this hesed, without God. Only through God can we experience it. And so when we say we're living the already but not yet, what that means is we can begin to experience the blessing of God's redemption, of His salvation in our life now. And we can live in the reality of the kingdom of Jesus, the kingdom of heaven right now, even though it's not here in the fullness. The story of Ruth, if it didn't have Jesus, it wouldn't be in the Bible. If it didn't have Jesus, it wouldn't be worth us reading today. But you know, the reality is, if your life doesn't have Jesus, it's not worth anything either. And I'm not trying to be derogatory. I'm not trying to make you feel bad about yourself, but I'm just trying to point to the power of Jesus Christ, that when Jesus Christ is in our life, it takes it to a whole new meaning, a whole new level. It gives us a purpose in life, and we're working towards something. Not just to have a bigger bank account, not just to have more prestige, not just to have more stuff, whatever that looks like, but it's serving the God of the universe to experience the blessing, this hesed. I experience hesed and you experience hesed when we work together for God's purpose, but only when Jesus Christ is part of the story.